As of late, it has come to my attention that the character of Spike from the show My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic has been somewhat unappreciated, both from the fan community and in some cases the writers of the show themselves. Now, of course, I am aware that he does have a large number of fans, myself included, and that he still does serve a purpose in the show, but I also cannot deny that I do feel somewhat disappointed with how he's been viewed and written in the recent series, and if I can, I'd like to try and explain why I personally find Spike to be an incredibly interesting and surprisingly complex character, because I think he has more significance than perhaps people realise, and I think that when we observe him in relation to the foundation of the Brony community, I think Spike actually played a vital role in allowing the show to gain such an unexpected mature audience. The reason I am making this video is not because I think Spike has been butchered or ruined by the current writing staff, but I am making this video because I think that as a character he has been somewhat underused, which I find to be a bit of a shame because personally I see so much potential in him and have so many ideas for him to grow and develop even further than he already has. And so with that, we shall begin. So who exactly is Spike? Spike is a baby dragon, and #1 assistant and friend to the main protagonist Twilight Sparkle, who is responsible for hatching him in the first place. He lives with Twilight and acts as a many number of things to her, occupationally being a butler, assistant, organizer, advisor, as well as a mobile fax machine, but more personally acts as a younger brother, a son-like figure, and a loyal friend to Twilight. The number of things that Spike represents in relation to just one character defines my first point of interest about Spike: his relationships with other characters and his sensitivity towards them. MLP has always flourished in its ability to create likeable and tangible characters that interact and create believable and meaningful dialogue, and the relationship between Spike and Twilight is, in my opinion, the epitome of this strength of the show. I am being completely honest when I say that I think that the relationship between Spike and Twilight is one of the most complex in all of fiction, let alone just cartoon animation. As I mentioned, to Twilight, Spike is her employee, advisor, and surrogate brother and son, and to Spike, Twilight acts as his employer, protector, and guardian. I use the words employee and employer specifically because, in regards to Spike's mentality, he genuinely views his position next to Twilight as a job, and in the episode All's Well Ends Well, we get to truly see how much he values this job as his main connection to Twilight. His loyalty and dedication towards her really does transcend the boundaries of regular friendship, for as we've seen, he finds it utterly terrifying to compensate a reality where he is without her. But while he does seem to find comfort in being useful towards her, I feel that they both seem to treat each other as equals. Yes, Twilight does maintain a strong motherly care and protection over him, but equally supports him and tries to teach him as many lessons as he does to her. Twilight can be scolding and strict towards Spike, but it's all done entirely out of care and concern for him. Equally, Spike also persists in being the straight man and voice of reason towards Twilight, allowing her to better adapt to social situations and to not let her delve into mental instability. They have a very healthy relationship, but they are essentially very much dependent on one another. Spike helps Twilight see things more reasonably and in perspective, and helps her overcome her social anxieties, and in return, Twilight allows Spike to see things more maturely and responsibly, so in the end they do sort of complete each other. I mean, just look at something as simple as Twilight losing a scroll. Even for such a trivial matter, she struggles to try and find a way around it without Spike's help. Whenever Twilight leaves Spike behind on an adventure, I don't think it's because she thinks him incapable, but because not only does she trust him and want someone she trusts taking care of things at home, but also allows him to try and learn things himself without Twilight's help. Kind of similar to how Celestia will let Twilight solve a problem, even though Celestia herself could probably have dealt with it more easily. The fact that Spike has been Twilight's main source of confidence and moral support since the very first episode really does define just how important Spike is. If it wasn't for his help and advice, I doubt Twilight would actually have made friends so quickly, nor would she be able to break out of states of vulnerability. It's largely due to Spike that Twilight doesn't delve into total anxiety, why she can adapt to social situations more easily or find a solution to a problem. Sometimes Spike's advice in hindsight can in reality be very minimalistic, but as we've seen, sometimes that little spark of reassurance and care is all Twilight required in order to overcome her own fears and challenges. Well, who helped Twilight make friends in Ponyville? Spike. Whose idea was it to replicate the gem-finding spell to find Rarity? Spike. Who was right about the main six having more fun as a group as opposed to separating to seek their own personal desires? Who called Princess Celestia to stop Twilight's mental breakdown? Who broke Twilight out of her trance from Sombra's mirror? Who saved the Crystal Empire? Who comforted Twilight in her time of need in order for her to discover what she needed to do to restore her friends? Who helped her adapt to the human world, and who saved the Equestria Games? Yep, Spike every time. Look, I know I'm just making a list here, and that one can practically be made for every character, but I have to point out one very important fact. With a few exceptions, most of those instances were due to Spike, but he wasn't the main focus of the story, nor did he really wallow in glory for effectively ensuring that the day was saved. Well, most of the time. This is why Spike works so well as a supporting character. He is relentless in ensuring the happiness of others, but doesn't always take the time or consideration about himself. Of course, this isn't consistent, but I think for a good reason. I think that when Spike is able to sense and understand when his friends' anxieties are really worrying them, he puts aside all else to ensure that their problems can be solved. But other times, when he views matters as trivial or less important, he actually appears to take a juvenile sense of glee in seeing others' misfortune. But never to a malicious or hurtful degree. It's just slightly part of his nature to be somewhat playful. But I think that's also justified, since he has always been in the company and acceptance of a family of friends that look after him. Only when we see him completely alone and independent does his more timid nature come out. Like I said, his relationship to Twilight can be seen as a sort of brother and sister relationship. So naturally, given Twilight's constant authority over him, and occasionally beating him around the bush and not always acknowledging his help, I can understand why he can find amusement in Twilight getting taken down a peg occasionally, because he doesn't always see her that way, and it gives him a sense of accomplishment in knowing he's right when he believes Twilight to also sometimes be a bit full of herself. And again, in parallel, this also works the same way from Twilight to Spike. I think this shows just how well Spike knows and understands his friends. He's close enough to them to understand when they are sad, but equally he can detect patterns in them, and he comes to expect it. We can see elements of Spike acknowledging similar routines with Twilight, fretting over what really are trivial matters, and why Rarity can lose perspective when idolizing a celebrity. He may come to expect these regular routines from his friends, but that still doesn't stop him from ultimately trying to solve their problems, even if he isn't always praised for it. Yes, Spike can sometimes be greedy and full of himself, but only because he rarely gets to be in that position, because most of the time he is comfortable in just helping and aiding his friends. More than comfortable, in fact, he has a compulsion to helping others, and it's interesting to observe his mental insecurity when he appears useless or unneeded, and I think that there's a lot to relate to with that. It also shows that as a character, Spike isn't perfect and does have his flaws. His compulsion to serve and help others can be shown to sometimes be taken to the extreme, up to the point where he begins to overlook the reason why people appreciate his help. Because it's a courtesy, not an obligation, but Spike's strong sense of purpose can sometimes blind him to this fact. It's also interesting to note just how strong a sense of purpose is in comparison to just how oblivious the other characters are to it. Spike treats his position next to Twilight as a job, yet I don't think Twilight would agree with that at all. In fact, it's strangely comical and somewhat disturbing that Twilight may refer to Spike as a number one assistant for the sake of being grateful and humouring him for his efforts, when in reality he takes that title to heart incredibly strongly. He doesn't always do his work to be thanked, but I can also appreciate why in the few instances where his work is appreciated and acknowledged, he can sometimes bathe in the glory and get a little heavy-headed. He isn't always used to it, so I can understand why he suddenly craves attention when he starts receiving it. But this also doesn't define his character, as for the most part, he seems very comfortable to just be supportive and generous to his friends, even if he doesn't always get acknowledged for it. I think that's why I admire him so much as a character, because he exemplifies the best aspects of being a friend. Supporting and helping your friends because you care about them and seeing them be happy is all the thanks you require. You do it for them, not for yourself. And I think for the most part, Spike does just that. That being said, I will admit that in the recent series, Spike's efforts have not been very well balanced with how much attention he receives in his comedic abuse. He's comfortable with not always receiving his praise, but he does appreciate it when he gets it, if anything because it's a good indication to him that his friendships have grown stronger. As I touched upon before, I think Spike really is the unsung hero of the show, and it's because of the fact that he is unsung that people like him. He does exactly what a good sidekick does. He helps the main characters reach their goals and overcome their fears, but at the same time, I think that there's also a lot more to him than just that. I think we've seen a very steady progression of maturity from Spike, and when we analyse him closely, we can see a lot of unique aspects about his character that do make him stand out as an individual. Another YouTube brony by the name of DRWolf001 made a very interesting point about Spike representing the element of sacrifice, up to the point where he begins to learn and understand that he may actually desire it, and seems willing to give up and sacrifice many things dear to him for the purpose of giving greater happiness towards his friends. I have to say that I agree completely with him. A lot of people seem to dislike Spike, slightly mainly due to the claim that he never has a very consistent personality. But I for one disagree. On the contrary, I think it's because of the multiple sides to his character and role and personality that make him incredibly complex and interesting to watch. I hope you've all enjoyed my thoughts and opinions on Spike so far, but unfortunately there is still quite a lot to cover, so I hope you'll all stay tuned for part 2. Until then, I am the Peaceful Ponderer, and I hope to see you soon.